In Gaza, the IDF and Shin Bet eliminated Muhammad Fathi Abdelkhai Abu Fakir, the commander of Hamas's Yabne battalion in the Rafah brigade. He was not just another field operative. For years, he was part of Hamas's smuggling, supply, and rebuilding network. And now he was trying to rebuild the force that had been damaged throughout the war. So why should the elimination of one commander in Rafah concern everyone watching Iran today? Because Gaza is not an isolated event. It is an Iranian laboratory. What Tehran is trying to do with nuclear weapons on the strategic level, it has already done for years inside of Gaza Strip on the educational, the military, and the terrorist level. Take a young generation, teach them that the Jews are an enemy that must be destroyed, send them into tunnels, arm them with rockets, explosive drones, and anti-tank weapons, and then call it resistance. While the Revolutionary Guards threaten the United States, demand immunity, money, control over the Strait of Hormuz, and even speak openly about the need for nuclear deterrence against Israel. Hamas in Gaza is doing exactly what terrorist organizations do when the world gives them time. It's rebuilding. The IDF has identified a troubling picture in recent months. Hamas is recruiting young men between the ages of 18 and 22. It is renewing training for Nukhba units. Every single month, it is producing hundreds of explosive devices, rockets, and anti-tank missiles. It is trying to smuggle drone parts and communication equipment into the Strip from the Sinai Peninsula. And it is rebuilding underground infrastructure in areas where it still feels it has room to breathe. That's why Israel continues to operate beyond the yellow line in Gaza. This is not just a line on a map. It's an attempt to push the threat away from the communities of the Gaza envelope, to prevent Hamas from moving close to the border again, and to make it understand that time is not working in its favor. But this is where the diplomatic battle truly begins. Inside the IDF, there are voices saying very clearly Israel must return to broad fighting. In Washington, however, there is opposition to such a move. The American administration wants to preserve the agreement, advance President Trump's vision, and move Gaza into the next phase through the Peace Council. On paper, it sounds clear. Disarming Hamas, establishing a new civilian administration, bringing in an international stabilization force, and creating humanitarian zones that will not be under Hamas control. The first pilot is expected to begin in Tel Sultan, near Rafah. Civilians without weapons and without ties to Hamas will be able to enter protected compounds. Aid will pass through supervised channels. And the goal is to separate Hamas from the population, from the territory, and from the resources. The problem is that Hamas was not born yesterday. It already knows how to turn aid into power, how to turn a school into shelter for terrorism, how to turn a mosque into a weapons depot, how to turn a hospital into a command center, how to stand in front of the cameras and talk about reconstruction while under the feet of civilians, it's digging the next war. We saw it again in Rafah, in the White Sparrow Tunnel, an underground route more than 16 kilometers long, up to 30 meters deep, that's 100 feet, and around 80 rooms and infrastructure spaces. A tunnel that ran under a dense civilian area, with schools, mosques, kindergartens, clinics, and even an UNRWA compound. Engineering forces, the Yahalom Unit, and Southern Command forces sealed it over several months with more than 30,000 cubic meters of concrete. That's not a tunnel. That is a military city beneath civilian life. And that is exactly the heart of this story. Hamas wants the world to see ruins. Israel sees a system. Hamas wants the world to talk about reconstruction. And Israel is asking who will control the concrete, the crossings, the fuel, the money, and the next generation. Because if the same doctrine remains, if the same education remains, and if the same weapons remain, then the question is not whether Hamas will recover. The question is when it will attack again. Guys, what you see on YouTube is only part of the story. Get closer to first-hand reports, behind-the-scenes moments, and stories of faith, resilience, and hope from Israel if you visit tbn.org/journeys/boots or text BOOTS to 316-316 for direct updates from TBN Israel. with me, Mati Shoshani, and Yair reporting directly from the country, you're not just watching the news, you're witnessing what's happening on the ground. TBN Israel brings honest and full coverage from the ground in Israel to viewers around the world. In partnership with TBN, we share what's really happening through a Christian perspective, rooted in truth, in faith, and the people living every day. Your support helps deliver on-the-ground reporting, real stories of resilience and hope, and trusted coverage that connects Christians and people of faith around the world to Israel. Now back to Gaza, because almost 3 years after October 7th, Hamas is trying to sell the world a new version of itself. Less massacre, more politics. Less Nukhba forces on camera, more delegations in Cairo. Less slaughter in the communities of the Gaza envelope, more words like reconstruction, technocratic committee, stabilization force, and Palestinian freedom. But inside Israel, and especially in southern Israel, people remember very well what happens when words are confused with reality. The head of the Sha'al HaNegev Regional Council said it simply: anyone who does not listen has learned nothing. While Hamas prepares the next attack, Israel cannot afford to go back to an imaginary defense line. And that is exactly why this episode you're about to watch is now important right now. In the series Heroes of October 7th and beyond, led by the one and only Erick Stakelbeck, we enter one of the hardest and most important chapters of the war, into the maze of evil. This is an inside look at Israel's ground maneuver in the Gaza Strip, at the most complicated urban battlefield in the world, and at the way IDF soldiers fought an enemy that turned homes into traps, schools into firing positions, and civilians into human shields. This is not a history episode. It is a guide to understanding what's really happening now. Because to understand why Israel cannot allow Hamas to rebuild, you have to see what the soldiers found when they went inside. You have to understand what it looks like to fight an enemy that does not value life, not Israeli life, and not the lives of its own people. You have to hear from the people who were there, inside the homes, inside the streets, facing the shafts, facing the explosives, and facing the hardest moral question of all. How do you fight evil without yourself becoming evil? I'm Mati Shoshani, and what you are about to watch now is not only a story about the fighting in Gaza, it is the story of what happens when Iran builds a doctrine of annihilation and Israel is forced to enter the maze in order to dismantle it from within.
We couldn't contain the terror that was emanating from this place. Complete loss of control of the Gaza Strip. Complete.
On October 27th, Israel launched a full-scale ground invasion.
It wasn't that you had to pull people out of their homes to come serve. You're talking about 150% attendance rate. But I won't lie to you, it was, of course, one of the scariest nights of my life.
I went through their houses. 95% of the houses over there supporting Hamas, while they're using their own people as human shield.
Hamas, on the 7th of October, is an organization bigger and more organized than all of ISIS.
Who paid for it? And why are the people starving when billions of dollars went into building the Hamas war machine?
This is a moral code or lack thereof that we can't wrap our heads around.
How do you fight a war against an enemy that doesn't value life? Not yours, not theirs. A death cult driven by pure evil. In the aftermath of October 7, 2023, Israel was about to find out. Over 2 years have passed since that dark day. But to understand why this war looks so different from all the ones before it, you have to rewind to those first days. Israel had endured 4 so-called mini-wars with Hamas. Operation Cast Lead in 2008-2009, Pillar of Defense in 2012, Protective Edge in 2014, and Guardian of the Walls in 2021. In a country that values life and hates losing its sons and daughters in war, Israel had avoided full-scale, boots-on-the-ground invasions. Instead, it lived from attack to attack, ceasefire to ceasefire, absorbing blows, striking back from the air, and containing Hamas in the hopes of buying quiet. But October 7th shattered that cycle. This time, the mission wasn't to simply restore calm, it was to dismantle Hamas, root and branch. The IDF's invasion began with massive air raids, targeting command centers, rocket launchers, and tunnel shafts across the Gaza Strip. And then came the decision that marked a turning point, to send the IDF in on the ground. This was uncharted territory in the modern era. Israeli troops would have to fight block by block, house by house, against an enemy that had spent nearly 2 decades turning Gaza into a booby-trapped fortress of terror. On October 13th, 2023, armored IDF units made their first limited ground incursions into Gaza, probing defenses and gathering intelligence. 2 weeks later, on October 27th, Israel launched a full-scale ground invasion.
היי הלוחמים, אנחנו יוצאים למתקפה על החמאס וארגוני הטרור ברצועת עזה. כל עם ישראל, כולם סומכים עליכם ומאמינים בכם.
Over 100,000 soldiers, infantry, tanks, combat engineers, and elite special forces surged into northern Gaza. Gaza City, Khan Yunis, and eventually Rafah. The world said, don't go into Rafah. Israel went anyway, because without driving into the heart of Hamas's operations and cutting off the lifeline of rockets and contraband flooding through the Philadelphia corridor on Gaza's border with Egypt, there was no chance to dismantle Hamas. Israel's intelligence work stunned even seasoned commanders and eventually led to the killing of Hamas's elusive leader, Yahya Sinwar, the architect of October 7th. Now, despite what the global propaganda machine would have you believe, Israel never abandoned its moral code. Before strikes, the IDF dropped leaflets, made phone calls, and sent text alerts warning civilians to evacuate. Hamas, on the other hand, did the opposite. They not only refused to protect their own people, they ensured that they'd be in danger. Hamas embedded rocket launchers in neighborhoods, stored weapons in mosques and schools, and forced Gaza civilians to stay in harm's way as human shields. While Israel built a nation where civilians are protected with sirens, reinforced safe rooms, and bomb shelters, Hamas built something else.
פיר מנהרה אסטרטגי, רוחב 7 מטר, עומק מטורף.
A sprawling underground terror tunnel network larger than the New York City subway. Above ground, Gaza's civilians were left exposed. Below ground, Hamas leaders sat safe in bunkers, directing the fight, sacrificing their own people for propaganda victories. The Gaza war wasn't just a military campaign, it was a test of values. And in the months that followed, the IDF showed that strength and morality are not opposites. They're two sides of the same fight. Today, Mati Shoshani is sitting down with one of those young IDF heroes, Elkana Cohen, a reserve combat officer who was boots on the ground in Gaza, staring the enemy in the face and seeing its true horrific nature up close.
Captain Elkana Cohen, But today, just civilian Elkana Cohen. You left the uniform behind for today. You're here with us, and we're talking about the events of October 7th through the perspective and the eyes of someone who fights in a very prestigious unit in the Israeli army and has seen a lot, hundreds of days, of what the war has looked like from multiple fronts. So first of all, thank you for taking the time to come and talk.
Thank you for having me. It's really a great privilege to be here. During my active service, I used to serve in Duvdevan. For those who watched Fauda, this is basically almost the same as what we do.
Duvdevan, which means cherry, is very well known for being a unit that does things to the edge, is the cream of the crop when it comes to counterterrorism, and it's the cream of the crop, I think, when it comes to the difficulty of the training that goes into it.
Yeah, I served there as an officer, as a team commander. I used to be in charge of process combat experience and also in charge of the recruits to the Elite Commando Unit. But on October 7, I joined my old team that I did the training course with.
You go into Gaza, you're in 551, so this is a crack unit that goes in ahead of a lot of the other forces. And the people of Hamas in Gaza knew you guys were coming.
Definitely.
Had already built up an entire infrastructure of terrorism and tunnels and all that jazz awaiting the IDF.
Yeah. It was crazy. We were the first brigade to cross the border and to start fighting there. Usually when we conquer land, when you start moving forward, you know that your back is safe already. But because in Gaza they have huge subway city under, you can advance forward, but then one of the Hamas terrorists showing up from tunnel and shooting towards you. One time we went into a house after we were scanning and searching hundreds of houses against terrorists and tunnels and bombs, and we were already exhausted. We were searching the cabin, the beds, but all of my friends were already tired, so they lay down on one of the beds there. And I was very tired, and I wanted to also fall asleep. But right before I went into Gaza, my wife told me, Elkana, every time when you feel tired, this is your time to be aware. So I think I probably had that in my mind. And I opened one of the cabin and I found a doctor certificate. And all of my friends told me, Kuna, you see, he's a doctor. We have nothing to be worried about. So like, all right, and I kept search. And I was searching, and then I opened another cabin and I found AK-47 magazine, and then I found radios. And I told them, let's stand up and let's try to move one of the heavy beds that was there. And when we moved that, we saw 2 missiles connected into electricity wire that were supposed to explode while we were inside this house. And we went outside, but right before we did it, we put small amount of TNT in order to trigger the bomb to make sure that no other soldier will go into that house. And when we came back to see what left from that house, this house was ashes till the ground, and 3 houses surrounding them was totally destroyed. And as someone who cherished life, I didn't understand why people will put bombs inside their house. Like, for me, it was crazy to understand that there were people that were willing to jeopardize their babies, to jeopardize their family, you know, to fight someone that they only hate.
We're gonna find, it says that there's like AK-47 inside the teddy bear.
Every house that I've been through was full with bombs, rifles. And I also saw their math books. When we went through the schools, we saw books that the math quiz was, if you murder 2 Jewish and you have group of 10, how much have left? This is like what they're getting educated since they're born.
So you're describing the homes, but the homes are empty at this point, right?
Most of them, yeah, okay. 95%.
Where are the people?
We let them know that we're coming. and we tell them where to go, and we tell them where is the safety zones.
من أجل سلامتكم عليكم إخلاء بيوتكم فورا والتوجه إلى المناطق الموجودة جنوب وادي غزة. جيش الدفاع الإسرائيلي غير معني بالمساس بكم وبأفراد عائلاتكم، كما أن البيت الذي يستخدم على يد المنظمات الإرهابية سوف يتم استهدافه.
While we fighting out of caring about those civilians, well, I can tell you that I went through their houses. 95% of their houses over there supporting Hamas, no doubt. And yet, we're trying to avoid any casualties while they're using their own people as human shield.
מחרטת אמל"ח בין בתי מגורים ליד בתי ספר.
One time, we were needed to concrete a school full with terrorists and also terror infrastructure. But we also knew that that school was full with civilians, and we started calling them all out. But no one left the area, and we didn't understand why. So we used our drones in order to scan that school from above. And then we saw that there is Hamas guards inside that school that didn't let those civilians to leave the area. One of the kids there, from the drone, it seems like a 5-year-old kid, tried to run away, and one of the Hamas guards, without second guessing, took his AK-47 and killed this kid in front of his mom. And in that point, we understand that we have to kill those guards, not only for our sake, but also for those people's sake.
Wow.
And one of the Hamas terrorists, he was holding a baby just in front of us. And behind them was a guy that was holding a camera and just waited for us to take that shot. And of course, we didn't take that shot. I put my life on the line. He knew exactly where we were. They could have aimed any RPG sniper that they had towards us. And yet we didn't take that shot because unlike them, you know, like, we're not killing babies. We don't want to be there. We don't want to fight. Don't forget that we're trying to look for our people, our brother and sister that got kidnapped. I remember myself going house to house, looking at the walls, making sure if there is any sign of like someone wrote something on the wall, left something behind, to see like tears of blood on the floor. I wanted to see something. Like for me, my entire goal was to rescue my brother and sister. And you're losing friends out of good cause because we're fighting in order to do good things. But unfortunately, we lose so many good people. One time, we heard an explosion very close to us. And I felt that this is like, it was 100 meters away. And I was on the watch and I heard the radios getting crazy. And I gave the radio to one of my friends. I told him, Michaeli, what is going on right now? And then we understood that we lost 2 people of our battalion. I lost a lot of friends, 28 to be precise.
You know, when this war started, I think a lot of people in Israel and outside of Israel were concerned about how will the Xbox, the Nintendo,
TikTok generation,
how will they deal in the time of war? You know, it's so impressive to see the fighting spirit that they have in them, and it pulled everyone sort of out of their coma and said, hey, wake up, guys. We're fighting here for our existence against an evil that wants to destroy us.
I think that as a Jewish people, we've been through a lot through history. And if you ask anyone through those times, they will tell you the Jewish nation probably will be eliminated. One of my best friends, his name was Eitan. He used to sleep in the same room in my mechina, in my yeshiva, and then he used to serve in my unit, and we lost him. And when my wife delivered our first baby, both of us decided to call my son after Eitan. When we see grief, when we see hard time, we're not focusing on the hard moment. We know them, we know how to deal with them, but then immediately we're going into the positive side. Because We know that what we do, we're doing for the greater good. And I think this is who we are. We're not looking for fight. We want to stay at home with our families.
Elkana, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Israel sends its sons and daughters because it must. Most just want a quiet life, not a lifelong fight. But when called, they go in under a written code, the spirit of the IDF. It begins with 4 fundamentals: defend the state and its people, love and loyalty to Israel, uphold human dignity for every person, and serve as the people's army under Israel's laws and elected government. From that foundation flows the field rules. Purity of arms. Use force only for the mission and only as needed. And do everything possible to spare uninvolved civilians and prisoners. Human life. Treat life as precious, even in combat. Responsibility, reliability, and personal example. Tell it straight. Own your actions. Lead from the front. Professionalism and discipline. Master your craft and follow only legal orders. Camaraderie. Never leave a comrade behind. And a sense of mission. Serve as a vocation, not a slogan. This war has tested that code against an enemy with no ethics or values set. A death cult that hides among civilians while propaganda flips the story upside down. Yet the IDF standard stands, written, taught, and enforced. I'm about to meet another IDF hero who embodies this code with every step he takes. His name is Aaron Bours. Aaron, it is great to have you with us. You've got an incredible story of survival and heroism. But before we get into that, take us back to your beginnings.
Sure. I grew up in Great Neck, Long Island. My parents fell in love in Tel Aviv. My dad is from Holland. My mom is from New York. He was on a kibbutz. She was in Ulpan studying Hebrew.
And this was a Zionist home.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We grew up with love for Israel, and my identity as a quasi-Israeli growing up was from that.
So that factors in, obviously, to your decision to become a lone soldier.
Yeah.
Tell us what a lone soldier is.
A lone soldier means that you're serving in the IDF without your parents physically here in Israel. There's about 5,000 lone soldiers, give or take, every year in Israel. They give up whatever, luxuries and privileges they had in the homes where they grew up, and they come here to serve.
You left a comfortable life in New York, a prosperous place, and you came to Israel, where you knew there was a very good chance you may see combat and may see action.
Right. I was pursuing dual degree in business and literature, and that was meant to be the track I was going on. And then I just got to the understanding that the best way for me was to join the protection of Israel, its people, the Hebrew tribe.
And you served in the Givati Brigades, pretty legendary.
Givati is Southern Command, so anything that happens related to Gaza, Hamas, usually involves Givati. And being in the reserves means that at any given notice, you are part of a fighting force, you're part of a defensive force.
You drop everything and you go.
Yeah. Everyone's got their back.
It's pretty amazing to me with reserve duty. I mean, guys in their 30s and their 40s, even older, leaving their families, leaving comfortable lives, comfortable jobs, and literally going to the front lines.
Yeah, it wasn't that you had to pull people out of their homes to come serve, right? I mean, you're talking about 150% attendance rate. You see the fear on a lot of these reservist faces as we understand kind of the gravity of the situation. And you also see the motivation because of how many were killed, captured, violated in disgusting ways. And I had never seen the IDF like that. Eventually on October 30th, we went in.
Right now, thousands of Israeli children are carrying wounds you cannot see. They've lived through rocket attacks, through terror, evacuation, sleepless nights, and the constant fear that their world could change in a moment. Many of these children are struggling with trauma, with anxiety and emotional pain that no child should ever have to endure. That's why organizations like Shiloh Israel Children's Fund are providing critical therapy, emotional support, and healing programs for children affected by war and terror. Their mission is to help these kids find hope again and rebuild their lives. But they can't do it alone. Today, I want to ask you to stand with the children of Israel. Your gift can help provide trauma counseling, therapeutic programs, and life-changing support for a child who desperately needs hope and healing. So please go right now to israelchildren.org/hope. Every donation matters. Every child matters, and together we can remind these children that they are not forgotten. They are not alone, and there is still hope. Thank you, and God bless you from Israel.
Eventually, on October 30th, we went in. Artillery, Air Force, our tank units, Shirion, all the elite forces, search and rescue. It seemed like everyone was moving in unison. We went in on foot. It was 6 kilometers to get to Bet Hanun. That's the north of the Gaza Strip. But I won't lie to you, it was, of course, one of the scariest nights of my life. Bet Hanun was a mess from the beginning. It's a civilization, unfortunately, that's bred on the demonization of others versus the perseverance and the prosperity of their own, and you feel that in going house to house. There's no art on the walls, there's no portrait of the family. If there's something on the walls, it's some kind of framed picture of a martyr who either died trying to or successfully hurting or killing Jews. And this is kind of a common theme as you go through these houses. When we'd find stacks of photos, there was always a photo with the men, little kids included, holding AK-47s. Just a feeling of violence.
אנחנו נמצאים בחדר שכתוב עליו בייבי גרל. יש לנו פה חגורת נפץ, ערכת הפעלה, נשק קצר.
Right, an understanding of just the visceral nature, unfortunately, of how these kids grow up and how quickly they're exposed to weaponry and how quickly they're exposed to terrorism.
A culture of death.
Yeah. In one of the homes we went into, there was, in one of the bedroom closets, one of the little girls, there were rocket heads.
ערימות של רקטות.
And one of the kitchens, there was wooden boards. When we took them off, there were AK-47s and bullets for those AK-47s. School backpacks, we found grenades. And it shouldn't have come as a surprise to us or a shock to us, but it did. That on the 15th day, there were Hamas terrorists hiding inside of an UNRWA school, ready to pounce.
Hiding inside of a UN-sponsored and funded school. And that brings us to your story.
Yeah. So we're moving house to house, looking for these tunnels. We found 6 of them. And we're tasked with overtaking a home where we believe there might be a tunnel. It requires us crossing in front of this UNRWA school. It's a path of about 150 meters. And there was something eerie about that morning and about that place. I get to the house that we were meant to overtake. I get to the entrance of the house and turn around to see where my officer is. He's about 20 meters, 65 feet from me. I hear and I see shots fired from the school. I see my officer go down. Omri David, he's in really bad shape. He's lying on his side. But I make a split-second decision that if I don't try to get him inside, save his life, he's gonna die. So I ran out to him. I lift him up over my shoulder. I take 2 to 3 feet towards the house where our soldiers are to get it back to safety. And on that third step, bam, I feel something like a cannonball hit my leg, knocks me down on my face. Now I'm on the ground. I instantly believed that I lost my leg. I couldn't feel anything below my knee. If I don't crawl myself back to the house, I'm probably gonna lose my life. So I start to crawl, getting myself out of that situation. As I'm crawling, and I'm moving quite fast, they're trying to finish the job. So there's bullets flying all around me. One of those AK-47 bullets strikes my left leg, so I get shot in my left leg as well. And now I'm just pulling myself from my upper body to get to the house. And none of our soldiers came out to try to get me, which I'm very happy about, because, you know, with a sniper, it's basically a death zone. So you start to think about, you know, your life and it ending. But so yeah, I was able to get back into the house. I was evacuated in a Hummer and then helicopter by 669. It's probably the best search and rescue team in the world. Sure enough, miracles do happen, and I woke up at Sheba Medical Center, and the doctor told that's 99.9% of the time, fragment of the bone or a piece of the bullet will hit an artery and you lose the leg. And that didn't happen in my case. I was in a wheelchair for the first 3 months. Then I graduated to crutches, and then one crutch, then a cane. There was also a walker in the middle there. So quite a long recovery.
כל רגע אתה ממצא כמה שיותר לפוטנציאל של הצעד הזה. צעד גדול, צעד גדול. ולהישאר זקוף. פה לא צריך לעבוד מהר. צעדים גדולים. צעד גדול. 5.
The volume of people trying to visit injured soldiers, trying to cheer us up, support us, was like nothing I've ever seen before. Probably an anomaly in any other country in the world. The amount of volunteers, of people pouring in to give us gifts, to donate money. You had doctors flying in from all over the world to just provide services, support, care for the soldiers. At one point, it was overwhelming. I had to lock the door of the room. I mean, it was insanity. It was beautiful to see.
It's an amazing country. It's an amazing people. And yet, we've got this misinformation, disinformation campaign raging around the world. Anti-Israel sentiment skyrocketing.
Yeah.
Anti-Semitism exploding. It's a very, very troubling trend. And Aaron, that's why I think what you're doing now is so important.
Yeah. So I've never been super active on social media, and I really didn't plan for this at all. But after I was injured, the people came to interview me. I was one of the only native English speakers in the ward. Many of the gripes of some of the soldiers in Gaza is that our lives are put more in danger because of the fact that the IDF acts with such restraint. A few reporters come and start to kind of air my story and get the word out, right, about what had happened to me.
He was recently shot in both legs while attempting to save one of his officers during a firefight out of a school.
My name is Amir Bours, and I'm a proud, really proud lone soldier in the IDF.
So being thrust into the limelight because of this story and telling that story in synagogues and churches and college campuses, I think that's a muscle that I need to flex, not just for my own recovery, but also because I just don't think there's enough people doing it.
I continue to recover and I continue to receive lots of that support, and I have a lot to be thankful for, and yeah, that's my story.
Good evening, Toronto. I'm Aaron Bours, but certainly a different Aaron from October 6th. I've battled in Gaza, sustained critical injuries, and have undergone
Jihadism is real, it's growing, and it threatens freedom, safety, your values. So find your maximum point of impact and push hard, harder. I'm Israel Shai.
My story includes something that I think a lot of people still deny to this day, which is that Hamas essentially takes schools, hospitals, places of worship, and they flip them into what for them is applicable to the battlefield. This is a moral code or lack thereof that we just, we can't wrap our heads around. And in the IDF, it's the opposite. There's a strict moral code. In fact, that's why the school was standing. So this UNRWA school where they were shooting at us from, there's a reason why it was left intact. My officer, Omri David, may he rest in peace, he was killed because of that moral code and because of Hamas's abuse of that same code.
And that code is the spirit of the IDF, right?
That's how I knew the IDF before I enlisted. It's how I knew the IDF while I was in active service. It's how I've known the IDF as a reservist. No soldier that I've served with, not a single one, takes any pride or joy in the fact that civilians get killed. When that happens, it's only by mistake or calculated error. And it's because those civilians are put in harm's way by Hamas. And I do feel for that civilian population, and most of the people I serve with feel for that civilian population. The average Israeli wants to see peace. The average Israeli wants to live their lives, provide for their family, pursue a career, protect their homes. These are not people that look for war or want to be at war.
Aaron, thank you for sharing your incredible story of survival, a miraculous story of heroism. It's been an honor to be with you. We can't thank you enough.
Thank you.
When we return, we'll dive deeper into how Hamas's hellhole took root on Israel's border. And we'll meet a war hero who served in Gaza decades ago and saw it all coming. So how does a place that's been called the world's biggest refugee camp turn into a hardened war zone? Stacked with rockets, booby traps, and miles of tunnels. Who paid for it, and why? And moreover, why are the people starving when billions of dollars went into building the Hamas war machine? Start here. Hamas didn't do this alone. It belongs to Iran's payroll and playbook. Cash, training, weapons designs, and doctrine flowing from Tehran to turn Gaza into a forward operating base against Israel. Layer on years of smuggling through Rafah and dual-use materials diverted underground. Concrete that should build homes instead poured into fortifications. Pipes that should carry water turned into rocket casings. Fiber optics that could connect classrooms strung through command bunkers. Above ground, you see crowded streets. Below, a city within a city, built for war. How did they get away with it? Partly through information warfare and an aid ecosystem that Hamas learned to exploit. Money arrives for civilians, but the regime skimmed, taxed, and redirected, while embedding rocket launchers beside homes, schools, and mosques. Classrooms taught children to hate. TV programs glorified martyrdom. A generation was groomed for conflict. Even as militants hid among families and dared Israel to respond. And when Israel did, the images were weaponized to turn world opinion against the IDF's effort to dismantle the Hamas machine. That brings us to the UN. For years, Israeli officials warned that UNRWA and other UN frameworks in Gaza had been compromised. Structures meant to be neutral were turning into a shield for Hamas.
אפשר למצוא פה חגורות נפץ, רימונים, נשקים שנמצאים פה בתוך המשרדים של אונר"א.
Warehouses and clinics exploited. Schools used for incitement. Payrolls and programs infiltrated. billions flowed into Gaza over the years. Some openly, some under the table, yet ordinary people are left in want because the priority was never bread, it was bunkers. Hamas poured treasure into tunnels and rockets, then seized and redirected aid, stockpiled fuel underground, and positioned itself as protector while using civilians as human shields. And this strategy has continued throughout the war. So yes, there is suffering, but it's the predictable outcome of a strategy that treats the population as cover, not as citizens to be served.
אנחנו עכשיו במצב חירום, אנחנו במערכה, ואנחנו צריכים לצאת מהפחד להתחכך. הם נבנים, הם בונים את עצמם למערכה, שהם ירגישו מספיק מוכנים, או שתהיה להם איזושהי הזדמנות, שהם יחשבו שהיא ההזדמנות הנכונה, הם יפעילו את זה.
I'm sitting down with someone who saw this arc long before the world did. Brigadier General Amir Avivi spent years as a senior IDF commander in and around Gaza. More than 2 decades ago, watching the early stages of this buildup, he warned what would happen if Gaza was left unchecked. And that's exactly what began after the Oslo Accords. Signed in 1993, it was the first treaty aimed at resolving the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Under this agreement, Israel handed over control of the Palestinian areas in Gaza to the newly formed Palestinian Authority, hoping it would finally lead to peace. At that time, Israelis and Palestinians were still living side by side in Gaza under Israel's control, sharing the same roads and daily spaces.
General Avivi, it is always great to see you, and really for the times we are living in, you are the man who has the insights on everything happening right now in the region. You spent 30 years in the IDF. You spent time in Gaza, General.
So, actually, the first time I arrived to Gaza was in 1997. But as you know, in 1994, Oslo was implemented. And this changed everything. We handed the cities in Gaza to the Palestinian Authority. We said, okay, you guys, you manage the cities, we're not going in anymore. 2 years later, 1996, they launched a huge attack on us with the weapons we gave them. From the 6-day war all the way to the early 90s, Gaza was a non-issue. And suddenly, in 2 years, from 94 to 96, everything changed in the Gaza Strip. And I find myself in 1997 arriving to be the combat engineer officer of the Gaza Strip division, and I'm shocked because turns out that a minute after we left the cities in Oslo, and among other things, we left Rafah. Immediately, they started digging tunnels from the Gazan side of Rafah to the Egyptian side of Rafah. And in 2 years, we found 35 tunnels on the Philadelphia corridor. 1994, Oslo was implemented. 2001, the first rockets were shot on the city of Sderot. 7 years from stones to rockets. It took them 7 years to move from the Stone Age, literally, to shooting rockets on Israel. And we couldn't contain the terror that was emanating from this place. And unfortunately, 10 years after Oslo, complete loss of control of the Gaza Strip. Complete.
Did you see Iranian influence even back then?
Definitely. At a certain point, I was the deputy of the Corps of Combat Engineers, and we were dealing with the issue of improvised explosive devices. And at that time, the US had many casualties in Iraq. So we had many meetings, professional meetings, trying to understand, this phenomena of IEDs. And it didn't take a long time to understand that what the US was dealing with in Iraq what was happening in Lebanon, the IEDs in Gaza were all the same, were all Iranian. All Iranian know-how. In the year 2000, the second Intifada, between 2000 to 2002, they murdered more than 1,400 Israelis. Endless amount of attacks of suicide bombers. And we won decisively against them in Operation Defensive Shield. And then the logical thing to do was to take the army, go to Gaza, and get it over with, dismantle this terror infrastructure. Instead of that, one day the chief of staff and I were sitting, and the secretary comes in and says, "Open the TV, you need to see this." We open the TV, we see Prime Minister Sharon saying, "I decided to pull out of Gaza."
פינוי יישובי עזה וצפון השומרון הוא מהלך קשה עד מאוד. זה לא יום קל, זה לא יום שמח.
He didn't consult with the army, not with the Ministry of Defense. And the chief of staff says to him, "Mr. Prime Minister, if you pull out of Gaza like that in the middle of a war, in 1 year, Gaza will become Hamastan, El-Qadastan, and Hezbollastan. This is what's going to happen." He decided to move forward with his plans. And 1 year later, Hamas took over through the Palestinian Authority, which were also terrible, okay, but they threw them from the roofs. And then with weapons and capabilities that were pouring from Egypt into Gaza, with a lot of Iranian know-how and specialists, they built a whole city underground, the city of tunnels, hundreds and hundreds of miles, which are like whole buildings underground. And they created a reality that the biggest strength of Israel and the IDF was not relevant anymore. We couldn't hit them with the Air Force because it was all underground, but also, inside hospitals and schools and kindergartens. So it's not something you can hit. And because everything was done underground, also no intelligence. And this is how they build a huge army. Hamas on the 7th of October is an organization bigger and more organized than all of ISIS. All of ISIS that was fought by an international coalition for years. Hamas was bigger and stronger and more organized and more equipped.
You've been warning for years. They're planning something big is coming. How did Hamas get to the point where it's able to pull this off on October 7th?
When I retired after 30 years of service, I felt, like a deep sense of existential threat.
זה שטח עשרות מונים יותר גדול.
So 5 years ago, I decided to found IDSF, Israel's Defense and Security Forum, which is a combination of a grassroots movement and think tank. And I can tell you that 2 years before the war, some of the leading generals called me and said, war is imminent. We are going to a multi-front war, and we have only two choices. Or Six-Day War scenario, or Yom Kippur scenario. We need to choose. It's either we are proactive and we attack first, or they are going to attack us and it's going to be a complete surprise. On the cover of this assessment, we put a picture of a frog being boiled in a pot. And we said, this is Israel. 30,000. And if we don't do something, this frog is going to die, And we presented it to the former government, to Netanyahu when he was in the opposition, to the president of Israel, to the head of Mossad. And what we saw is they are not listening.
עכשיו אני שואל שאלה, האם ממשלת ישראל, מערכת הביטחון, משטרה, מג"ב, צה"ל, מתכוננים לעניין הזה באופן הנכון והמקיף וגם ברמת דחיפות הנדרשת? אני חושב שלא.
They were thinking if we just postpone the war more, eventually all our enemies will collapse. While Israel was thriving, the economy was blooming, They embraced the American way of thinking about how America dealt with USSR, the idea of containment.
Yeah.
USSR collapsed without one bullet being shot at them. And we said, guys, it's not going to happen. They're going to attack first. So on the 7th of October, as devastating as this was, this terrible day, On the 7th of October, something else happened also. This frog jumped out of the pot. It's not there anymore. And it gave us a big, big opportunity to change and to end our fate. And this is the message we conveyed to the Prime Minister. We said, Mr. Prime Minister, yes, terrible, really, what happened to us. But this is your moment to take advantage of a terrible crisis and lead us to total victory. From there, we are going to move to regional and global peace agreements, normalizing relations with Saudi Arabia, with Indonesia, Malaysia, possibly even countries like Lebanon, maybe Syria, who knows?
What should Gaza look like, General?
The government has said it from day one. The day after Hamas, there will be no Hamas, no Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and also not the Palestinian Authority. There will be some kind of cantonization of Gaza, local leadership based on the local clans, on the families. So we have to complete the militarization of Gaza and also changing the basic education, you know, from jihadist education to people who actually want to coexist.
Fighting for the West, for the entire free world. That's what Israel's doing. That's what you're doing. General, thank you so much. We appreciate it. God bless.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.
In this war, Israel has had to change its playbook. Survival can't hinge on headlines or hashtags. The IDF is fighting to win, not to be liked. Because for a nation surrounded by enemies, staying alive is the only metric that matters. This is a country that has blessed the world: medicine, water tech, cybersecurity, disaster relief, a peace-loving nation that would rather heal than fight. But when evil targets your children and hides behind its own, you face a hard truth. Sometimes you must be tough to be merciful, firm now to spare greater suffering later. And here's the larger issue. Hamas didn't act in a vacuum. The Iranian regime bankrolled, trained, and guided the machine in Gaza. And as the war unfolded, the pattern snapped into focus. Tehran has been building a ring of fire around Israel, Gaza to the south, Hezbollah to the north, militias in Syria and Iraq, proxies in Yemen. An Iranian-backed ring of fire aimed at a long war of attrition, bleeding Israel day by day, rocket by rocket, hostage by hostage, hoping time and world opinion would do what armies couldn't. Those are the stakes. Israel hasn't just been fighting a terror group, it's been confronting the architects behind it. Next time, we zoom out to the northern front. Hezbollah, Iran's strongest proxy, battle-hardened, heavily armed, joined the fight against Israel just one day after the October 7th attack. We'll break down their arsenal, their strategy, and the choices Israel faced to keep the North from exploding. Stay with us.
Hello, this is Mati here in Jerusalem with TBN Israel.
This is Yair Pinto from TBN Israel here in Jerusalem. TBN Israel is keeping viewers informed with Israel-focused news, culture, and what God is doing in this land.
Support TBN Israel today online at tbn.org/Israel. Thank you.